All right, hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this solo episode of the That Chapter podcast, well, folks, it's just me today. Just a Mike episode solo, Mike solo combolo. Big K, Dirty Keith, he is not joining me today. You know, probably much like yourselves, just kind of got sick of him. You know, just had enough of him. I've had it up to here with Keith and his story, so finally I kicked him off the podcast. I said, "You're Audi 5000, my friend." Okay, no, that's not actually what happened. I'm just recording this one myself because, you know what, I was talking to Keith and I was like, I got this really interesting story come up, and Keith said no. He said he just wasn't having it. He said, F you, F this That Chapter podcast, and F your amazing, incredible listeners. Okay, again, I lie again. He didn't actually say that. But when I said, hey, I'm traveling soon, so I gotta record an episode of the podcast myself, and he said, okay, I was reading between the lines, and that's kind of what I believe he said, but maybe not his exact words. But you know what? Don't worry, or dread it. I don't know. I don't know how you feel. Keith will be back for the next solo episode of That Chapter podcast, but today, it's Mike only. It's a Mike Bolo something solo, and today we are talking about well, it's kind of a weird one, this whole episode. In fact, if my sidekick was here, he would also call it really weird or whatever kind of bullshit Keith would say. So for this one, you just got me and my solo witty banter, but there's probably not going to be a lot of witty banter in this one because it's a really, really strange story. It's bizarre. And it's insane. It is the story of Ellen Greenberg, a young woman who met, an incredibly tragic death. But the question is about what happened to Ellen. Was it by her own hand or no? See, this is one of those kind of like locked room mysteries in that, well, you know, she likely did it to herself. There was no sign of anyone else there, and the door was locked. The usual, well, story. But, it's also kind of got the whole she stabbed herself 10 times in the back of the head thing, which is probably kind of hard to, do. So in this whole episode, So in this whole episode of the That Chapter podcast, I'm going to start with the scene itself, then a little background, and then we will look at the two separate possibilities one at a time. First, the self-inflicted theory. Then secondly, the, not so self-inflicted theory. Let's give it a go. Manayunk is a nice little old neighborhood northeast of Philadelphia Central. It's by all accounts a pretty place, quiet, filled with Victorian homes, townhouses, and it's ripe for young families, which it is full of. These days, it's pretty gentrified. Young executives and people who are just very important, or at least think they are, live there. Sitting in this neighborhood, just along the Schuylkill River, lies the Venice Loft Apartments. These are 2 rows of 4-story apartment blocks, perfect for the young professional, much like yourself, no doubt. Well, that is where, on a late January day, a man was walking, huddled over, almost bent, as the wind ravaged the area, walking quickly as a storm was approaching. It was coming in fast and hard, like I am into your eardrums, folks. It was a blizzard. This was the depths of a Pennsylvanian winter. But however bad things were outside, they were a whole lot worse inside one of those apartments. This man's name was Sam Goldberg, and he was about to make a horrifying discovery. At 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday, January 26, 2011, 28-year-old TV producer Samuel Goldberg placed a call to 911.
Help, I need everything now. I just walked into my apartment. My fiance's on the floor with blood everywhere.
What is the address?
4601 Flat Rock Road. Please come. Help.
4601
Flat Rock Road.
Is this a house or apartment?
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Apartment.
It's an apartment. Please hurry, please.
Where is she bleeding from?
I don't know. I can't tell.
So you have to calm yourself down in order to get you some help.
I'm sorry. I don't know. I'm looking at her right now. I can't see anything. There's nothing broken. She's bleeding. Ellie!
You don't know where she's bleeding from? Can't see where the blood's coming from?
I think her head. I think she hit her head, But it's everywhere.
Okay,
it's everywhere.
She might have fallen. Do you know what happened?
She may have slipped. There's blood on the table. Her face is a little purple.
According to what Sam would later tell detectives, his fiancée, 27-year-old first-grade teacher Ellen Ray Greenberg, had gotten home from work much earlier than expected as severe snowstorms were causing chaos across the wider Philadelphia area. Close to 4:45 in the PM, Sam had gone downstairs for a workout. There was a gym in the building. He'd returned around half an hour later, but found the door to the apartment he shared with his fiancée Ellen. It was locked from the inside, and he could not get a response from her.
I went downstairs to go work out. I came back up. The door was latched. My fiance's inside. She wasn't answering. So after about a half hour, I decided to break it down. I see her now just on the floor with blood. She's not responding.
Why had she locked the door, knowing he would be back shortly from the gym? Banging, calling her name, nothing. It was completely dead silent in the apartment, and Sam's concern grew quickly as he knew Ellen had been struggling with depression and with stress. She'd recently started seeing a psychiatrist for anxiety as a deal with her parents. Like, it wasn't your regular dose. It was pretty severe. So, standing outside that apartment, having texted her for more than 20 minutes without any reply, well, rather than take any chances with his fiance's safety and worried she might have done something drastic to herself, Sam decided to break in. But, strangely, not before he called his cousin, a lawyer, and also spoke to his uncle, who was also a lawyer, just to check, am I within my own rights to break into my own apartment when I'm worrying my fiancée might have hurt herself? It's weird. I think most people probably wouldn't have bothered calling. They just would have tried to kick down the door. But regardless, Sam did. And once he got inside, he was hit with the worst sight imaginable. The woman he was due to marry in just 6 months' time was soaked in blood and completely unresponsive on the kitchen floor.
Okay, is she breathing? Look at her chest. I need you to calm down, and I need you to look at her chest. It's really.
I really don't think she is.
Listen to me. Someone's on the way. Look at her chest. Is she flat on her back?
She's on her back, so I bring her.
Look at her chest and tell me if it's going up and down, up and down.
I don't see her moving.
Okay, do you know how to do CPR?
I don't.
Okay, I can tell you what to do, okay, until they get there. I want you to keep her flat on her.
God.
Hello?
Yeah, hi, okay.
Are you willing to do CPR with me over the phone until they get there?
I have to, right?
Okay, so get her flat on her back, bare her chest, okay? You want to rip her shirt off. Okay? You need to kneel down by her side.
Oh, my God. Ellie, please.
Listen, you can't freak out, sir, because you
Okay, I'm trying not. Her shirt won't come off. It's a zipper. Oh, my God. She stabbed herself.
Where?
She fell with a knife. Oh, no, her knife's sticking out.
Her what?
There's a knife sticking out of her heart.
Oh, she stabbed herself?
I guess so. I don't know where she fell on it. I don't know.
Okay, well, don't touch it.
Okay, so I just let her down. Here now? I mean, what do I do?
No, I mean, you can't. If the knife is in her chest, it's going to be kind of hard for you to do CPR at this time.
Oh, no. Oh, my goodness. Okay. Is someone coming here?
Yes, they are. You said 4601 Flat Rock, right?
Yes.
Okay, someone's on the way. And the knife is still inside?
Wait, so what?
The knife is still inside of her?
Yes, I didn't take it out.
Was it her chest or what area?
It's in her chest. It looks like it's right in her heart.
Okay, someone's on the way out there. Okay, just get.
Oh my God! Okay,
how old is she?
She's 27.
27, and there's no sign of life at all.
No, please don't be. What?
Pinch her under her arm and tell me if she responds to pain.
Ellie. She's not. Her arm and her hands are still warm. I don't know what that means, but there's blood everywhere.
She was pronounced dead at the scene at 6:40 p.m. that cold January day. Though the scene was certainly suspicious, Ellen, she had a serrated edge steak knife still lodged in her chest when first responders arrived on the site. Well, with the information Sam had given them and the door being locked from the inside, Ellen's death was initially handled as a suicide. That was, until the autopsy revealed Ellen had been stabbed 20 times in total. That's a lot if you're going to hurt yourself, stabbing yourself 20 times, that's a lot. But not even that. 10 of those stab wounds were deep wounds to the back of her head and her neck. Which, I don't know how that would actually be possible to stab yourself 10 times in the back of the head and the neck. And if you wanted to, say, end your own life, doing it in that manner it seemed ridiculous. The medical examiner, named Marlon Osborne, having no knowledge of the scene or situation outside of his own post-mortem examination of the body, he recorded the manner of death as a homicide. The next day, though, detectives would announce they were treating the death as suspicious, but not necessarily a homicide. The constant contradictory statements naturally caused a lot of confusion among the public and even with Ellen's family, as they had no clue what had happened. The issue was that everyone was making their own determination based on the facts at hand. No one had the complete picture. Nobody was inside in the apartment, well, that we know of. In February 2011, Ellen's death was recorded as a suicide. This is a month after she died. And that, my friends, is a conclusion her parents, Josh and Sandy, have spent the next decade plus fighting to have overturned. You know, that's what I mean when I talk about a locked room mystery. It's literally a locked apartment, but how could she have done that to herself? Anything is possible, but it seems extremely unlikely. So who was Ellen Greenberg? Well, Ellen was born in New York City, that big ol' apple, on the 23rd of June, 1983, the only child of Joshua and Sandy. She was dearly beloved by her parents, and growing up she was known to be a very happy, sweet girl who was big into fashion, big into cooking. Listen, if you Google any... I still gotta stop saying listen. If you Google any pictures of Ellen Greenberg, she's got this big old grin in every face. You know, it is such a cliche to say the whole smile the little balloon, but in the pictures it's very easy to see that she would have had that. She was very close with her dad, and often they would go to various sports games together. She would go with himself. Whatever sports it was, the Greenbergs would be there, let me tell you. After graduating high school, Ellen then went on to study at Penn State University, and there she got herself, if you can believe it, one of them degrees in communications studies. Should have got one of them myself, and this podcast would be like 10 million times better. She initially wanted to be a speech pathologist, but she would later change her mind and say she wanted to work with kids. And something everybody around her, when she said that, they were like, oh, duh, yeah, that makes sense. Like, she was amazing with children. So, Ellen, she went back to college, she studied at Temple University, and she got a degree in showing kids how it's done, teaching, and fair play to her. Shortly after, she began working as a first grade teacher, and hey, she was shit hot at it, she was the bee's knees, she was the dog's bollocks. It was in 2008 that Ellen met Samuel Goldberg. The green meets the gold. It was through a friend that they met, hanging out one night, and they were sort of set up. In fact, it was almost like a blind date kind of thing. A friend said, oh, hey, you guys be really good together, and they were hella right. It was on a trip across country is when Sam proposed to Ellen, and she gave him a hearty hell yeah. Sam, he worked in TV as a producer. I believe he worked for NBC and that kind of thing. Ellen, a teacher, and so they seemed like a good match. They were due to be married in the summer of 2011, but that was not to be. So the time frame of Ellen's death, it's actually pretty well defined compared to most cases. Ellen sent her last text message at 3:47 p.m. and last used her computer almost exactly 1 hour later, which was a few minutes before Sam left for the gym at 5:40 p.m. Sam was seen multiple times by a security guard and returned to the apartment a half hour after he left, so around 5:20 p.m. And that's when he found he'd been locked out, and so he sent several angry text messages to Ellen's phone. Like, what the hell, what gives, what the shit about this? Sam had asked the building's security guard if he could help him get into the apartment, but the security guard told him it was against, the company that runs the building, it was against their policy. And the couple's neighbors, they heard Sam banging and shouting as he tried to get in. So if Ellen's death was murder, then there is one person who stands out as the obvious frontrunner for the title of murderous bastards, right? Her boyfriend. And a lot of fingers have been pointed in Sam's direction. And while it can't be denied that he would be the most likely suspect if Ellen was murdered, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that someone else could have entered the apartment without anyone knowing. Entered the apartment, attacked Ellen, locked the door so she couldn't escape and no one could get in, and then slip out by the time Sam got in. There is a concierge at the front desk, so it's unlikely anyone came in that way. But there's also back and side doors that aren't monitored in the same way. That said, according to everyone who saw the scene, there were simply no signs of an intruder at all or of a struggle. Ellen herself had no defensive wounds on her arms or on her hands. If someone else, Ellen didn't know or didn't trust was in the apartment, like surely there would be signs of a break-in or at least, signs of Ellen resisting unless she was attacked, somebody snuck up behind her, that kind of thing. But then, of course, there is Sam. All of this happening in such a short space of time, and Sam not being seen or recorded with blood on his clothes or trying to dispose of bloody clothing. That just doesn't fit the timeline. If he had murdered her, he would have been covered in blood. She was stabbed in the front, in the back, everywhere. It was an extremely violent scene. It would be one hell of a magic trick for Sam to have committed such a brutal murder and managed to get rid of incriminating evidence in such a tight window of time. And that's not to mention that if Sam did murder Ellen, it would have been completely unplanned and in the moment because Sam hadn't even been expecting Ellen to be there at the time. Remember, Ellen Greenberg was only home early because of the actual blizzard outside that had closed the school before, she was due to be home. Ellen kept a diary in which she detailed her feelings and mood changes, including how the medication she was taking for her anxiety had affected her moods further. Ellen had searches on her computer for suicide methods, quick suicide, and painless suicide, which leads me to believe all of them would tell her to stab herself so many times in the front and back of the head. In a 2019 review of Ellen's case, the Attorney General's office upheld the suicide ruling, thanks largely to those suicide term-related searches on Ellen's computer and several text messages between Ellen and family members that talked about Ellen being mentally distraught. Ellen had seen a psychologist 3 times in the run-up to her death, and though her psychologist agreed that Ellen was struggling with anxiety, she had not mentioned suicide or suicidal ideation in her sessions with the psychologist. This was supported by her mother, Sandy, who said she had not heard anything about suicide from her daughter, never mentioned self-harm, and that she and Ellen had actually had a pleasant call the morning of her daughter's death. However, it's also proven that people who, might want to hurt themselves, it's often reported that right before they, hurt themselves, they're actually much happier because it's like they've made that decision. So the weight has been lifted off their mind. It's like if you know somebody who's severely depressed with suicidal ideation, if they suddenly become happy, that's kind of the time to worry. And again, just because someone doesn't mention hurting themselves or wanting to hurt themselves doesn't mean that they haven't thought about it. Maybe they're just unlikely to say it, as you can imagine, because it will freak everybody out around you. So a lot of those things seem strange, but then the searches on her computer, again, suicide methods, quick suicide, painless suicide, she stabbed herself 10 times in the back of the head. Who knows? This is such a bizarre case. So that's why they ruled for suicide. It was the fact that there was simply nobody else there, no signs of anybody else being there, the fact that she had been seeing, a therapist, a psychologist, and those searches on her computer. We don't know if she made those searches, of course, but they were on her computer, so that would lead you to that conclusion. However, a lot of people severely disagree with that finding, including Ellen's parents. Now, let me talk to you about the case for murder, or rather, the case of a cover-up. When the call Sam made to 911 was released, it got a lot more eyes looking in his direction. I'm sure several key details likely jumped out to you without me having to say anything when we just played the clip. Things like when Sam was asked if he was willing to attempt CPR on Ellen, he responded with, "I have to, right? You have to? Well, you probably should want to save your fiance's life by giving her CPR." That's so far from any answer I would expect to hear from kind of anybody. It might as well be in another hemisphere. When Sam did finally get round to trying CPR, when asked to make sure Ellen was laying on her back, Sam told the 911 handler that she, meaning Ellen, already was. After a brief tussle between Sam and the zipper on the front of Ellen's sweatshirt, Sam suddenly, seemed to notice the 10-inch knife sticking out of Ellen's heart. That might be one of the first things you would notice, but you could be in shock. But even with the astonishing amount of blood loss caused by the 20 stab wounds obscuring his view, the idea that the knife went completely unnoticed for so long, it just doesn't seem plausible to me at all. And it's what Sam said next, though, that kind of sealed his place as suspect numero uno in the minds of many. Oh my god, she stabbed herself. There's even a question of whether or not Sam actually attempted CPR at all. According to the police, when they arrived on scene, they found Ellen was on the floor, but her neck, head, and shoulders were propped up against the cabinets, so she was in a slumped position. Given there would be no reason for Sam to have propped Ellen's body up against the cabinets before the police arrived, and if he was doing CPR, it would have made it even harder to do, one of those two things must be wrong, and raises the question of whether Sam actually attempted CPR at all, or whether he was actually following the operator's instructions. Either he didn't perform CPR, or he moved her. Only one of those things can be true. Sam swears the door was latched from the inside. However, crime scene photographs show the latch wasn't exactly the most stable, and it wasn't the most stable or secure looking lock of all time. It wouldn't have taken a great deal of force to have kicked it in like Sam claims he did, but equally, it wouldn't have taken very much force at all to have tugged at the latch from the inside, simply making it look like he had kicked open the door. The searches on Ellen's computer could have been made by anyone, and even if they were made by Ellen, searching these terms and actually going through with harming herself, two very different things. I mean, listen, folks, you know me, you know the stories I'm looking up, all sorts of horror. You should see my search history. Scratch that. Delete that. Warthog, editor, delete that. Ellen had just fixed herself a salad literally moments before she died. If she did it to herself, why would she? That's not exactly the kind of behavior of somebody who's about to kill themselves, making themselves a delicious salad and then doing it. It would also seem to line up with the lack of defensive wounds on Ellen's arms and hands. Would seem to indicate, being taken by surprise, as does the half-finished dinner. If Ellen was suddenly and brutally attacked from behind, she might simply not have had time to react to try and even get her arms and hands in between herself and the knife. Likewise, if Ellen was distracted by making herself a meal, it would provide the perfect opportunity to approach her from behind and catch her completely off guard. And that last little snippet about Ellen being in the midst of eating her dinner when she died also goes along with something else Ellen did just before she passed away. On her way home from work, she had stopped off at a gas station and filled up her car. Which, once again, not the behavior of someone who's about to hurt themselves in the ultimate way. Now, to be fair to both sides, it wouldn't simply be right to not mention that this only stands if Ellen had planned on killing herself, which, given the way she died, it's pretty unlikely. Sometimes people who do hurt themselves, it's very much spur of the moment, it's not planned, it's a sudden, gut reaction just to do it to yourself, and a lot of people will harm themselves without even thinking about it. Pretty much nothing she did that evening, or in the day leading up to her death, could be seen as an indication of her intending to hurt herself. Which could mean either it was a spur-of-the-moment decision completely unplanned, Ellen, she just became so overwhelmed in that very moment, or, well, she didn't. Plain and simple, whatever happened, she didn't make any kind of choice, and she was murdered. So why was Sam so keen to mention something as specific as Ellen's extremities being warm? Unless he wanted to make sure that her death must have happened in a very tight time frame that would eliminate him as a suspect. It seems odd that Sam would mention something so specific to the operator when he seems to not notice the obvious knife sticking out of her chest for so long. That said, it is of course perfectly possible that, like with a lot of what Sam said, it was an effect of his thoughts just being scrambled by the shock of finding his fiancée in such a horrible state. Was it, some people argue it was an attempt to fix the timeline so that the timeline would be written down almost in stone during the 911 call? Or was it simply a genuine attempt to give 911 as much information as possible? As I noted before, police officers, detectives, and other responders to the scene all treated the scene and situation as a suicide. One of the main reasons for this was Sam's behavior. According to pretty much everybody who attended, Sam was reasonable and cordial with them. He appeared to cooperate fully and answered everything that was asked of him. I say appeared to cooperate because it may be that he, wasn't fully being honest with them. You see, in Sam's initial statements to detectives, he told them that the security guard at the apartment building had been with him when he'd broken into the apartment. Remember, he'd been waiting outside for long amount of time, had called his cousin, had called his uncle, the neighbors heard him shouting in the door, and then he busted in. He initially said, "The security guard was there with me," although the security guard had been the one saying, "We can't actually let you in. You can bust yourself in, but we can't let you in," which is weird. But that turned out to be untrue. Whether or not it was a deliberate lie, of course, that's another matter. It could have just been Sam misremembering. Again, it's important to keep in mind the psychological impact of what Sam would have been going through, and I think everyone has been in this situation where they've been with friends, and each of you remembers an event differently, even in the recent past. And that's without the traumatic experience of finding a loved one brutally stabbed to death. So Sam initially said to the police that the security guard of the building, a guy named Philip Hanton, was with him when he broke down the door. The police initially didn't speak to the security guard to confirm this, but later on, Philip did give a signed declaration to the courts that he did not accompany Samuel upstairs and see him break down the door. In fact, Samuel went up and kicked down his own apartment door alone, if he did indeed do it. Nobody witnessed him breaking down his own apartment door to get inside and then find Ellen. A question of whether or not some of the wounds were caused by more than one knife has also been raised. Some appeared to have been made by a serrated knife, like the 10-inch knife that was still lodged in her chest at the time of her body being found, and a second unfound knife that had a straight-edged blade. 2 knives definitely means murder, but only one was found at the scene, literally stuck into the victim. It would be impossible to explain a second knife being used, but not present. If it was at the scene, then this wouldn't apply. But for it to either have been disposed of or cleaned thoroughly and put away somewhere, that obviously can only have been done if there was another person there. Ellen would have been bleeding profusely from the first couple of wounds, not to mention it had a huge amount of pain that would have kicked in, so that she would have taken a break to sufficiently, clean and dispose of a second knife. If that had been the case, why would she do such a thing? Why would she hide maybe the second knife that was involved? I mean, this is all based on the type of wounds that were caused to her body when these reports were released. Some people think that 2 knives were used, some people argued it was just the one knife that was found. So in addition to the type of knives used, the order of stab wounds is pretty key to answering the question of what happened to Ellen. If the stabs to the back of her head and neck were made first, then most agree it would seem to point to someone taking her by surprise and attacking her while she was distracted. The stab wounds to the back of her head, the back of her neck would have incapacitated her, and therefore she wouldn't have had any, defensive wounds. One of the main arguments put forward by Ellen's parents and the experts that they hired to help them get the case reopened is that at least one of the wounds to Ellen's neck, it was so deep it nicked her spinal cord, and the wound would have caused at least some level of incapacitation. If that's the case, then Ellen Greenberg was definitely murdered. If she had been stabbed in the back first, that's murder. After all, we know for certain that the final stab wound was one to her heart. So if she did it to herself, if you're sticking with the suicide theory, how would she stab herself in the back, nick her own spinal cord, which would immediately immobilize her, and then somehow stab herself in the heart? That's not possible. The big problem with all of this, honestly, we're debating all this, folks, the whole how many minutes has been, I've been going through this, and all of this stems from how terribly the autopsy was handled. Not only was the medical examiner's verdict changed because of pressure from detectives, leading to flip-flopping back and forth between homicide, suicide, and undetermined, but even without the influence of the detectives, the medical examiner, Marilyn Osborne, he completely cocked up the post-mortem. So according to Marilyn Osborne's report, in total, Ellen suffered 8 wounds to her chest. I'm going to read you out. This is from the report. Quote, ranging from 0.2 centimeters to the final 4-inch wound of the knife still embedded in her chest, a 2-inch wound to her stomach, a 2.5 long gash across her scalp, and 10 wounds, from nicks to 2 about 3 inches deep to the back of her neck. There were also 11 bruises in various stages of healing on Ellen's arm, abdomen, and leg. Based on that exam, Osborne was satisfied he had enough to point to a verdict of homicide in the manner of death. The police, though, thought differently and were leaning towards suicide. That's when they asked Osborne, the medical examiner, to record an open verdict so they could look into Ellen's mental state leading up to her death. Osborne, he went along with this, but also decided to have a colleague give him, a second opinion, a second expert opinion on Ellen's neck wounds, specifically to answer that vital question of whether or not Ellen's spinal cord had been damaged, and if it could have led to her being unable to inflict the following wounds and the final wound, the stab to the heart. And that's when Dr. Osborne messed up. Rather than having his colleague, Dr. Lucy Rourke Adams, who was a renowned neuropathologist, then working at Philadelphia's Children's Hospital, come on up to the medical examiner's office and perform an inspection on site, Osborne, he went to her. And Osborne took Ellen's brainstem and a section of her upper spinal cord over to Lucy Rourke Adams at the Children's Hospital, and he had her do a cursory exam there. According to Osborne, she told him that the sheath covering the spinal cord had been cut, but not the spinal cord itself. Lucy Rourke Adams, though, a renowned neuropathologist, she insists she has no recollection of such an event taking place, and no supporting evidence like paperwork or a bill for her work has ever been found. She did acknowledge, though, that there was a remote possibility that something like this could have happened. I mean, basically, it probably did, but she knows it was unprofessional to have done so. Basically, just giving her, oh yeah, I'll have a look at it, and my off-the-record opinion, she knows that's unprofessional, and basically she's just trying to cover her own ass. The unofficial finding would indicate that Ellen would not have lost motor function, and so she could have inflicted the wounds herself. If this then influenced Osborne's decision to rule the manner of death as a suicide, then there's obviously a huge issue there, as the chain of custody was clearly thrown out the window. I mean, she's a renowned doctor, but still, this is her off-the-record opinion, and that completely then changes what happened. There's one last question that likely affects which side of the argument you come down on more than really any other, and that is whether or not you can imagine Ellen Greenberg, or anyone for that matter, choosing to end their life in such a gruesome and horrific way. At first glance, if you are told that someone, anyone, has been stabbed 20 times, including 10 times in the back of the head and the neck, well, your brain can only do the maths and see 1 + 1 = 2. That person clearly was murdered. It would seem to require a huge amount of mental gymnastics to make 1 + 1 = suicide with those limited facts. I mean, the thing is, though, people do commit suicide in some very strange and unexpected ways. There are many reports of people having tried to commit suicide by shooting themselves in the head, only for the attempt to not be fatal and having to shoot themselves again. Obviously, finding someone with multiple gunshot wounds to the head, everyone presumes there must have been foul play. Sometimes, though, that's just not the case. It doesn't take a lot of research to find all sorts of weird examples of, ways people died or ended their own lives. And Ellen's death does deserve a mention on any of those lists, if she did end her own life, which is the entire question here. The answer to that question still rages in the courts of Philadelphia to this day. This all brings us up to date. Ellen's family are still fighting their long legal battle and are suing both the city of Philadelphia and medical examiner Marilyn Osborne. They are seeking to have the official manner of death recorded as either homicide or undetermined in order to keep the investigation open. And they allege a cover-up occurred. Both Joshua and Sandy, Ellen's parents, have said publicly that they do not believe their daughter took her own life. Their suit alleges that the police, prosecutors, and coroner's office not only failed to investigate their daughter's death properly, but have deliberately acted to obstruct information that could indicate Ellen was murdered from coming out. There's no doubt that authorities, especially Marilyn Osborne, who now works in Florida, by the way, he up sticks and moved the shit out of Philadelphia, they definitely mishandled several details in this case. If they'd done things the way they should have been done, it's far more likely we would have an answer by now on what happened to Ellen. In addition to Osborne's errors on the autopsy table, the police possibly made the biggest misstep when they released the scene and allowed cleaning crews in to literally wipe away the evidence before they'd even finished their investigation. In September 2023, the Greenbergs suffered a setback in their challenge of the official verdict when the Commonwealth Court ruled against them and upheld the state's original suicide ruling. They determined there wasn't any legal reason to overturn the state's position. The Greenbergs, though, they ain't giving up, baby doll. They've continued on in their challenge and said that they saw the ruling as losing a battle, but not the war, and remained determined to have their daughter's case reopened because in late July 2024, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court granted their appeal to hear the case. A big win for the family who want this entire thing reopened top to bottom. It will take time to pan out, but who knows from this where it will go. Assistant District Attorney Guy D'Andrea did a review of the case after Ellen's manner of death was changed. Said he will testify that he spoke with the then medical examiner who claimed Ellen's body had been moved from laying on the ground to a sitting up position that they found her in. As we said, that's sort of what Samuel was insinuating on the phone, that he initially said on the phone she was lying on her back, and then when they got there, she was sitting up in a slumped over position, and authorities, they were able to tell this by how the blood on Ellen's face, it dried. There is no evidence that emergency responders were the ones who moved the body. If it was Sam, why would he move the body? It also should be noted there is a lot of conspiracy theories in this case that go all the way to the top. This case went to the governor of Pennsylvania, a guy named Josh Shapiro. He declined to reopen the case, and his office stood by the city's 2011 suicide ruling in 2019, and they continued to do so in 2022. And this is the conspiracy theory folk about old Josh Shapiro. People are claiming that Governor Shapiro has links to the Goldberg family, Samuel's family. And so, as a favor to them, don't reopen it, lads. Case closed. The case of the wounds being sort of impossible to do to yourself. And that, my friends, is the story of Ellen Greenberg that takes us up to today. This, as I said, this is a story that is still raging in the courts of Philadelphia to this very day. I mean, this episode is going live in the September of 2024. Still going on. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court will hear arguments from the family. As I said, the assistant district attorney said he's going to testify for the family, in the argument that it wasn't a suicide and they want this entire case reopened. Ellen Greenberg, she was a beloved teacher. She was only 27 years old. Whatever happened to her, whether it was self-inflicted or whether she was murdered, it was a horrifying way for such a sweet young woman to go. But now the lengthy court battle, which has raged since her death, it's going to go to Pennsylvania's highest court. Who knows when this will be heard, but I'm sure it will be very interesting. So keep an eye out for that one. And that will do it for this whole episode of the That Chapter podcast. I hope you enjoyed. Listen to me yammer on by myself. No banter in this one, but you know what? I'm having a banter. We're having a good time. You and me. You, wherever you're listening to this. I hope, this was intimate, just me and you. Just me and you this time. No, we don't need a third wheel like Keith in the mix. We're just having a little date, you and I. All right, folks, the next episode of the That Chapter podcast, you know the drill. New episode is out every single Monday morning, available for free on all podcast platforms. So give it a go. And if you could do me a favor, please rate and review the podcast. 5 stars, please, because that really, really helps out the podcast, helps it grow, it helps get some more folks listening. And as always, new videos on the main That Chapter channel are coming out every single Tuesday. Who knows what I'm going to be talking about in the next episode when you're listening to this, but I'm sure it'll be a good one. And who knows what the next episode of podcast will be, but you'll hear Keith talking and you'll probably be able to hear my eyes rolling. All right. Now you have a good ass time. All right, folks, here, please, until the next one, take care of each other and yourselves. Because I love you. Mike out.